Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I've got something really fascinating for you. Later on I'm going to be doing the crossover, not the transition pictures, but the crossover of Professor Peter Higgs, the theoretical physicist who died on April 8th, 2024. That's very recent for me, and I don't do full transitions for people when it's recent because I think it's unfair on those who are mourning them. But his crossover pictures are incredibly fascinating and so different to anybody else's that I've done that I thought I would tell them to you. And that ties in with a set of pictures that I did on the other channel for the CERN particle accelerator in Switzerland. Peter Higgs was the mathematician, physicist who theorized that there was a subatomic particle yet to be discovered. It later became known as the Higgs boson. And a large part of the scientific community set off to look for that. Billions of dollars were spent on trying to find it, and they found it. It was later dubbed the God particle, a name that Peter Higgs himself really didn't like because he was a confirmed atheist. Said openly that he didn't believe in God. Little realizing, I suppose, that God is not something you believe in. It's something that you are. Each individual, including Peter Higgs, is an offshoot of all that is. We all have a spark of the divine inside of us. So I was very interested in his crossover, and as I said, I'll bring that to you later. First, though, I want to show you a piece I did the other day on the other channel about the CERN particle accelerator, because I firmly believe, having done those pictures, that this is going to alter the future of the human race. So I'm going to play you that piece of video first, and then I'll come back and I will tell you the crossover for Peter Higgs. So I do understand why people are incredibly concerned about what's going on in Switzerland with the CERN Large Hadron Particle Accelerator. I don't pretend for a second to understand the technology here, the science, but here's a drawing of it. I have no idea. You go and figure it out. But apparently what they do is they fire two beams of subatomic particles down a tube in sub-zero temperatures and a vacuum with no dust or anything. It's just pure beams of protons or something, and at some point they make them collide. And I think the tubes can be long and straight, or they can be circular, and the beams go round and round. I don't know any more than that, but people are very concerned that this is a step towards something that we can't take back, a bit like AI. There seems to be a quest for the origins or the core elements of time and space and creation and God and whatever, and I understand why that is unnerving to people. So I've been asked several times to do pictures with this, and I thought, really, how can I possibly do pictures for a particle accelerator when I don't even understand what it is? But I thought, I've been wrong before, so I'll give it a go. And that's what I did. And I went into the energy of the CERN Large Hadron Particle Accelerator to see what came. And when I did, immediately I looked at this photo here, and immediately it was like I had a fist in my head that was punching forwards, and I slammed against a wall. Right now, I thought this meant the quest for knowledge that was pushing people forwards to discover things that maybe ought to remain undiscovered, something like that. But there was a compulsion, there was an obsession, and I had to go with it. And I slammed into this wall, and straight away, I began moving sideways. It was so weird. And then it went around a corner. It's like there's a new discovery, something happens that reaches the next stage, and on I went, still with my head glued to the wall, feet off the floor. The weird thing was, and this is a little bit gruesome, but the weird thing was that such was the intensity of my focus, my concentration, my obsession, that it was scraping not literally, but in metaphorical terms, scraping the skin off my forehead. I was so focused, I couldn't see the harm I was doing to myself and others. It's like, be careful what you wish for, because there may be a price to be paid for this. And it went on and on. And suddenly it went round a corner. Something from this part of the research turns into that part of the research. And off I went again, down the corridor. This is serious. How much do we want this? How curious are we? And are we prepared to take the consequences of what we're doing? That's what this felt like. There could be a price to be paid. But then it stopped. The corridor was finite. It was just space. All the galaxies that ever exist, all out there. I came to the conclusion that this was probably the start of the next phase of human evolution. We're not there yet, but we are getting there. Some part of this research, or maybe all of it cumulatively, takes us up to a higher level. And yes, it was difficult, and yes, there were lessons to be learned, and it could be painful along the way. But this was all in the cause of elevating humanity to the next level. It could be possibly time travel, or the kind of space travel where you just say, oh, I'm going to Venus today, and 5 minutes later you're on Venus, that kind of thing. Or transmat beams, where you can get to Australia from England in under 3 minutes, like they have in Star Trek, stuff like that. It could be that kind of evolutionary thing. In fact, I got chills all across my head, my scalp, as I was doing this. It felt so real and so energized. Well, there you go. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. It's interesting that the officers at CERN in Switzerland that were used to research the particle accelerator were the same officers used in the 1990s to research the World Wide Web. That's where the internet came from, those same officers. But there's no doubt about it, Professor Peter Higgs was a genius in his field. I know we throw that word around a lot these days, but he was a genius. He died on April 8th, 2024, at the age of 94, of what's being called a short illness. It's an interesting date, that April 8th, because the Large Hadron Collider had been closed for a while, and it was reopened on April 8th, 2024. Strange coincidence. But Peter Higgs was a rebel in some ways in his lifetime. He was a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. He was a member of Greenpeace. He even turned down a knighthood at one point because he was somewhat cynical about the British honours system. Mind you, he won virtually every other award going. He was a Nobel laureate. He was given 16 honorary doctorates over the course of a lifetime, plus many, many other prizes. And there are institutions named after him. His name will go down in history, as will his research, because it will ultimately, maybe a century from now or 2 centuries, it will change the course of humanity. But he didn't believe in God. And I am always fascinated by what happens to atheists when they cross over and discover that the world beyond is not what they thought it was. So I went into Peter Higgs's energy, there he is, to see what happened. And when I found him, he was staring into that dark tunnel that I frequently see when people are about to cross over. Remember, he died of a short illness. He was 94 years old. But he was staring into it, and there wasn't fear here, I didn't sense. It was more about, I wonder what this is. Okay, show yourself to me. As if you were taking a pebble and throwing it down a well to listen for it hitting the water so you knew how deep it was. That kind of thing. It had a sort of Indiana Jones feel to it, like, I wonder what this is. Where is this going to lead? So in those few days before he crossed, he was appraising the prospect of dying and what it meant. But he finally climbed in, and it was really tight with a very low ceiling. A bit like when you get a tall person trying to get into the back of a cab with bags and things, and they're all scrunched up trying to get in. It's a bit like that. He was ill-fitting, like he'd expected so much more of his end than he was being given. But once he committed, once he stepped into the tunnel, he was all in. Okay, let's go. It's time. And he moved along this tunnel, sort of holding the ceiling as he, metaphorically speaking, of course, holding the ceiling as he went, kind of looking around. It was very dark. And then he came to a dead end. It's like he conjured up in his consciousness a reality of, oh, well, there you go. I told you there was nothing. I told you we just die and it's all over. Something like that. It was simply a black wall ahead of him, like going down a mine shaft and coming to a dead end. And he stared at it, and I stared at it, actually thinking, well, there we go then. What is that? There's no way through. When I pulled back, what had happened was, it was rather like a fault line, where the corridor he was in, the tunnel he was in, continued, but there'd been a jolt and the earth had been displaced, and one part of it was up here and the other part was down here. And he couldn't reach the top part. Although it wasn't like the two sides were jammed together like this, there was a small gap. But he couldn't get up it. He was way too big for that in the pictures. And then I realized that this was asking him to do something, to let go of control maybe, but also his ego's need to be on top of things, to learn, to have an answer to this situation. Just let it go. So there was room to get a soft, squishy ball or balloon up this gap. You need to loosen up. Let what you don't need anymore go. Your smarts, your calculations, your perceptions of life, your lens, let those go. And if he was prepared to, which of course ultimately you have to give in because there's movement here, there's a current. You have to go with it. And ultimately he just said, okay, and he just became soft and went up the gap and left a part of himself behind. The theoretical physicist part, the all-knowing science guy part was left behind. And the rest continued on. The soft, malleable part continued on. Then he arrived at that sort of welcome cave that I always see. It doesn't exist, it's just symbolic, metaphorical, but he stepped out into it with absolute fascination as he looked around. And as I waited with him, a crack appeared in the ceiling and the brightest of lights, blinding lights, shone down on him. Now, this wasn't like the light that I saw when I did Jesus's pictures for his death. That was blinding to the point where you could actually destroy your retinas with it. This was something else. It was more about revealing something to him that he'd spent his life looking for. And the irony, the paradox almost of it, was that he only discovered it by dying. Because here was the answer that he had been looking for, whatever that answer was. Here it was. That is your answer. And he got it. It's like, oh, yes, yes. Only he couldn't tell anybody. He was gone, but he wanted to tell people, this is it. This is what we were looking for. Humans may discover it 100 years from now, but he knew now. He knew. This was what this was, a reminder that he could stop thinking about this. He had the answer, finally. And another part of him was left there. It's almost like it sapped his brilliance away. You used as much as you could, you did as much as you could, you went as far as you could, but now you don't need the rest. So leave it here, put this down and move on. And having left two parts of him behind, the ego-controlling part and the brilliance part, the one that wanted to know the answers, Having left those behind, he moved on quite happy. The circle was complete for him. It would have been nice, probably, if it had been completed while he was in form. But at least it had been completed now. And his consciousness moved on, considerably lighter, considerably freer than it had been. There was no real concept here of God. So maybe his atheism was justified in that kind of way. There was nothing to do with God or Jesus or anything here. This was simply a process for him. You arrive, you find out what you needed to know that you didn't figure out while you were alive, and satisfied, complete, you move on. I think his contribution to human development will be in the form of perhaps time travel, as I said in the piece before, or it could be in terms of transport. Right now, we travel from one country to another on a plane using fuel. A lot of resources go into this, and it takes time and it's inconvenient. I think probably in the future, thanks to this kind of research, we are going to be able to beam up to satellites, a bit like GPS, really. You know, that GPS can be picked up by cars all over the planet, by satellites. Then I think we will be beamed up to satellites and down again, or something like that. So there is none of that sense of traveling for 8 hours to get anywhere, or going to faraway planets over millions of light years. It'll just be really, really fast because of the technology that comes from the Peter Higgs research. That's what it felt like to me. All right, that's it. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.